I, 27F, was cheated on my husband and fucked Superstar as revenge. It's Sunday morning, and my husband has just left to go help his brother fix a bike, but I'm left wondering what he does anymore. There was nothing unusual in how he acted this morning. He let me sleep in a bit while he made breakfast. I couldn't bring myself to walk down to the kitchen in my usual t-shirt and panties. I put a full cotton pajama set on because I'm struggling with what to think. He noticed that I was aloof and standoffish right away. I usually thank him with a hug and kiss, but couldn't bring myself to touch him, or even look at him for that matter. He asked me if I was okay, and all I could muster was, "I'm fine, just feeling a bit icky." I couldn't eat, and the coffee quickly turned my gut upside down. I apologized to him for not staying, but said that I needed to rest, and went to our bathroom. I stayed there until he had to leave, and he yelled, "Goodbye, get better," through the door before he left. It all started yesterday, when we went dirt biking in the mountains. We like to get out at least once a month, and it's getting late in the fall now. Pretty soon we'll be switching over to snowmobiles. We had a group of 6, my husband Ryan, his longtime friend Emily, 30F, her man Brad, 32M, my friend and client Kara, 31F, and her husband Seth, 37M. Ryan and Emily would be considered expert riders. They both grew up near the mountains and have biked, hiked, ran, skied, and snowmobiled them all their lives. I've been riding for the past 3 years since I started dating Ryan. We've been married just over a year now. Brad, Kara, and Seth all just started this past summer. All 3 of them are athletic and brave enough to enjoy riding, but I do find myself split between the 2 groups often. Yesterday, I decided to keep up with the thrill seekers and leave the newbies. I've learned to control my bike, when to hit the gas and when to lay off, how to recognize a good line to take versus a dangerous one, how to avoid shale, and when to stand or lean. I truly held my own, and both Ryan and Emily were very impressed. I even helped Emily get dusted off and back up out of a rock gorge that she failed to avoid. I could see the surprise in her eyes when I pulled her up. I don't think she ever realized how strong I am. I was a swimmer in college. I even tried out for our country's Olympic team and finished 6th, just a bit outside of being asked to continue training with them as an alternate. I've always been very fit, and I take pride in how strong I am for my size.
I'm all woman, though.
All of my gear and my bike are pink. I bought them when we started, and I've always loved my choice. Emily didn't, though. She would always tease me about being too girly for the mountains and would get downright mad if my bike had issues, calling it a pink piece of shit. It wasn't yesterday, though. I held my own, and she knew it. We always gather at someone's house when we're done for the day after dropping off our equipment. Last night, we were at Emily and Brad's. They have a small house but a big fire pit in their backyard. It's probably the last night of the year for that as well. We did our usual talk about the day, sharing war stories and showing off bruises. Seth had a good fall that will leave quite the bruise on his hip. I got to brag about pulling Emily up and helping her get her bike out of the gorge. Emily got pretty messed up and was trying to brag about climbs she had done in the past that I couldn't do at the time. No one gave her much airtime, though. She was starting to get emotional the more inebriated she got, sitting in her lawn chair, staring at me, and crying a bit. It was weird behavior for her. We shut it down around midnight, and Brad had to guide Emily into the house because she was struggling. I say all of the above to give what I view as the context for the text Emily sent at 3 a.m. that I read this morning. It said, *, I'm so sorry for what we've been doing, Betty. I hope someday you can forgive me. *. I think it's obvious how I'm interpreting this text, but there is a small hope that it could be just referring to her disdain for my writing ability up to now. I'm looking for some thoughts on how to proceed, and I'll answer questions in an update. I sent Emily a simple text. WDIM? Of course, it's still unread, and there hasn't been a response. Thank you to those of you who commented that this could be as simple as a drunken stupid text. It hit me so hard this morning that I didn't consider the possibility. The longer she leaves me hanging, though, the worse I feel about it. My husband, Ryan, called to check in. He wanted to know how I was feeling. I told him I was feeling better. He asked if I wanted him to come home early, but there was still some work to do. I said that I was fine. I usually head to the shop on Sundays to join him, so this is a little different from our usual routine. He and his brother inherited the shop 4 years ago when their dad passed away due to COVID. It's known throughout our area as the best place to get your mountain and lake toys fixed up. They do everything from repairs of boats, dirt bikes, ATVs, and snowmobiles to aftermarket improvements. They even buy and sell used vehicles when it makes sense. I'm a CPA, and I usually get the books up to date on Sundays. It's the only real time that I have to keep them up to date. I work in the city for a large public accounting firm. Between the demands of the job and the daily commute, I'm gone about 60 to 70 hours during the week. The shop is just as busy, and Ryan works about the same hours, so we don't really have times when either of us is working while the other isn't. We go for dinner, we go hiking, skiing, biking, or sledding. We just go for adventures and enjoy our time with each other. I say all this just to state that I don't know how he would have time to cheat on me. But my gut is telling me that something is up. Why would she apologize for something we've done? She's the only one that has been bullying me. Why would she need forgiveness? I called my friend Kara just to ask if she felt Emily was acting weird last night. She agreed that Emily was acting like she was struggling to say something. I like Kara, but she isn't close enough to me that I would confide a worry like this. She is a client who owns a high-end antique shop that she inherited from her grandparents around the same time as Ryan and his brother took over the shop. I like her, but I don't know if she's a trustworthy, empathetic person. I have access to all of Ryan's social media accounts. I pretty much manage them for the shop. There's nothing there and no indication that he has some hidden account. He's not big into that type of stuff, so I didn't expect to find anything when I looked. We have always shared locations, and I've never noticed day trips to Emily's or anything weird like that. The only person I would trust with my concerns is my mom. I'm thinking of heading into the city later this afternoon to give her a visit. She lives near downtown, and I do go in from time to time on a Sunday evening to visit her, stay overnight, and then work the next day before coming home. If anyone has any ideas on how I can find out if he's cheating, please help. Update. I called Emily, and there was no answer. I didn't leave a message because I didn't trust myself not to freak out. I then called. He said that they were working out the winter parts order, so his brother and he'll be working later today anyways. We both said, "I love you," when we ended the call, but it just feels dirty right now. I'm writing this late Sunday night, unable to sleep. My first seizure happened when I was 4. My mother has always said it was the most terrifying moment of her life. Luckily, it occurred in the living room, and I landed on soft carpet. She and my father rushed me to the hospital, and soon after, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. My mother raised me alone from the time I was 6. I've always believed that my father couldn't handle the fact that he had a daughter who wasn't perfect. He ran off with a younger woman and never looked back. I have a vague memory of what he looks like, but I always imagine him as one of those sharp-featured villains from the movies. Over the years, I've managed my condition through medication, breathing techniques, and sheer willpower. It's been a decade since I experienced a major seizure. I still have minor ones occasionally, but I can usually sense them coming. I've learned to control my body in a way that most people wouldn't even notice, aside from maybe a blank stare. Inside, though, it feels like I'm wrestling to keep still while trying to catch my breath. My mother has been my biggest support throughout all of this. She comforted me during the embarrassing moments and helped me adjust to the hunger that the seizure meds brought on. She also got me into counseling where I learned to understand myself better. Thanks to her, I've grown into a strong, independent woman who isn't defined by her diagnosis. I've always looked up to her as my supermom, and I constantly strive to make her proud. When I arrived at her place, she had dinner ready. She lives in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment downtown, just a short walk from my office. She's been working for a property management company for the last 20 years and is well respected in the city. It didn't take long before the conversation turned to Ryan and Emily and the possibility that something might be going on between them. I could tell that the text message shocked her, but she was more interested in their history. I haven't really gone into that before, so here's a bit of background. Emily is the classic ski bunny type. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and athletic. Picture the girl you always see in ski resort ads. She's about 5 feet 6 inches, built like a UFC fighter, strong and solid, but without much in the way of curves. Emily and Ryan grew up together. We live about an hour from a big mountain tourist town, full of lakes, ski resorts, golf courses. Emily's family owned a small ranch near the national park, and they were regular customers at Ryan's family's repair shop, so both families knew each other well. Emily and Ryan went to the same school and spent weekends hanging out. Her family would drop off equipment at the shop, and Emily and Ryan would head out on dirt bikes or ATVs. When Ryan's family went camping, Emily would join them to hike and ride in the hills. Emily's childhood wasn't easy. She lost her mom at a young age, and her dad and brother didn't really know how to raise a girl. Ryan's mom stepped in to help where she could. By the time Emily turned 14, she ran away from home and ended up moving in with Ryan's family for good. Most people can probably guess why, but it's not my story to tell. After that, Emily and Ryan were inseparable, like twins. They did everything together until she moved out at 18. She got a job at a big resort where she did a bit of everything: groundskeeping, ski patrol, search and rescue. She lived in employee housing, and Ryan would visit on weekends, ski, and enjoy the resort life. They both have stories about wild parties and crazy weekends. Each has had a few one-night stands where they woke up in a fancy hotel suite and then did the walk of shame back to the employee housing. I've asked them both directly if anything ever happened between them, and they always scrunch up their faces and say they see each other like siblings. But I've never fully believed it. Two young, attractive people spending so much time together while drunk, something must have happened, even if it was just once, right? Up until now, I've trusted them both completely. I never thought anything was happening between them during my relationship with Ryan, but after that text, I'm starting to question everything. My mom agrees that the whole situation seems pretty damning. Tomorrow, I'll spend the day trying to get in touch with Emily and see if she doesn't, I'll have to decide whether to confront Ryan when I get home or keep digging into their relationship. As always, I appreciate any advice. Sorting through this mess feels impossible without the support of everyone here. I've come across copies of the very first tests for professional accountants. They typically involved adding and cross-adding columns and rows of numbers. If the totals matched, you were in balance and passed, assuming your math was accurate, of course. Back then, candidates had a couple of hours to complete the task, and calculators were a no-go. Today, you could finish that same test in under 30 seconds. Just snap a picture of the sheet, import it into a spreadsheet, and voila. It's fascinating how people react when they learn about my profession. The usual comment is, "You must be great at math." But that's far from the reality of what accountants do now. After 5 years in public practice, I can say my work has little to do with traditional math. Nowadays, accounting revolves around financial information, compliance, communication, and negotiation. I've received training in all these areas. It was my negotiation skills I needed most when dealing with Ryan. I was determined to get the truth from him, knowing he would likely resist. I entered our discussion with a plan and a couple of backup strategies, but ultimately I fell short. Here's how it unfolded. I left work early. It had been a lost cause anyway. With only one billable hour logged instead of the usual 7 to 10, I knew it would raise eyebrows. I should have just taken a sick day, but here we were. I left at 4:30, aiming to be home by 5:30. I had told Ryan I'd be back around my usual time of 7. I wanted time to pack some belongings in case he came. It was ridiculous, given that we share locations, but maybe he'd just leave his phone at the shop while he's with Emily in my bed. I used the hour-long commute to focus on maintaining a positive mindset for our conversation. Keeping a positive energy is crucial for engagement in negotiations. Negative vibes can spiral out of control, and I had seen that firsthand. Of course, it's easier when you have no personal stake, but today, everything felt personal, and it hurt deeply. I practiced my questions mentally, determined to encourage him to open up and be honest. When I arrived home, thankfully no one was there. I brought several large suitcases from my mom's place and filled them with my clothes and keepsakes. I considered removing it. I loaded everything into my car trunk and waited for him, taking a moment to ensure I didn't look or smell like the exhausted shell of myself that I felt inside. I greeted him at the door around 7:15 with a warm hug and a meaningful kiss. I savored that moment, knowing it might be our last. I wanted to set a positive tone for our conversation and needed to draw some energy from it myself. I was right. He brought home food and drinks, just as I hoped. We settled at the kitchen table, and he began by asking about my mom. Earlier in the day, I texted him that I was feeling fine, so his question felt perfectly natural. I mentioned she was doing well and thanked him for understanding my last-minute visit. He responded that he missed me the previous night, and I sensed it was time to dive into the real conversation. I opened with a simple lead-in question. Have you talked to Emily since Saturday night? His response was quick and straightforward, lacking any significant body language cues. No, why would I? He replied. It wasn't the answer I wanted. His response forced me to take the conversation in a different direction. A simple no would have allowed me to maintain control, but now I had to engage further. Prepared for this, I followed up. Didn't you see how drunk she was? I focused intently on his body language at that moment. His brow furrowed, and his eyes shifted left. Although there was no change in pupil dilation, his demeanor shifted as he laughed. Yeah, I wonder if she's still hungover. I know reading body language isn't foolproof. It's merely an indicator of the conversation state. The words carry more weight, but body language provides important context. At this point, his response offered a glimmer of hope. It felt genuine and natural, and although the furrowed brow made me hesitate, I reminded myself that it could just be a moment of my overanalyzing his reactions. I chuckled at his comment, needing to keep the positive energy flowing, and his joke deserved a laugh. This was where I needed to set the stage for what came next. While still laughing, I said, "Come on, we both know she's no lightweight. In fact, she might still be drunk. Brad told me she's gone on vacation for the week." Ryan visibly jolted at that. His reaction was exactly what I anticipated. Brad is nothing short of a playboy, known for throwing lavish parties for wealthy tourists within miles of our resort. He hires and fires dozens of hopefuls each year, surrounding himself with people who lack any sense of morals. I've often viewed Emily's connection to him as purely transactional. She gets to live outside the employee complex, and he gains access to... I knew mentioning Brad would rattle Ryan, but I needed him to ask the crucial question. The question came quickly, and I noticed a hint of pain in his eyes when he asked, "Why would you talk to Brad?" I was still chuckling when he asked, and I could see that the light-hearted atmosphere had vanished. While I expected this shift, the intensity of his reaction caught me off guard. I took a moment to collect myself and calmly replied, "Because she sent me a strange text about us and didn't answer my questions. I've always found pleasure in the walk from my mom's house to my office. The city buzzes with life in the morning, filled with noise and people bustling about. There's this charming coffee shop on the corner that I always stop at. The barista there is consistently friendly and quick, a refreshing contrast to the tranquil hum of the mountains. I needed that energy this morning because I was running on just as I walked. My thoughts drifted to Ryan and our relationship. We had met at a dance club not far from my route. It was a Friday night, and I had recently gotten out of a relationship about 6 months prior when a group of coworkers decided to hit the town. While I was dancing with a couple of friends, I noticed a guy who looked like Hayden Christensen staring at me. I kept glancing over, and it was evident he couldn't take his eyes off me. Honestly, it was exciting. He approached me as I was leaving the dance floor, but it was way too loud to have a proper conversation. We ended up trying to talk in a quieter corner, but it didn't take long before we decided to leave and find a diner where we could eat and chat. His stories about his adventures had me laughing hard. We really began to connect when he opened up about his struggles with running the shop. Back then, I was filled with professional energy and couldn't help. He listened intently, even pretending to take notes. It made me feel special. I'm not one for one-night stands. With seizure medications and alcohol not mixing, I've never had that liquid courage. I've always approached relationships with caution, but from the very beginning, I was captivated by this guy. He walked me back to my mom's building, we exchanged contact info, and shared an impressive makeout session before I headed upstairs, and he went on his way. The next morning, he called and invited me to breakfast. Our conversation picked up as if there hadn't been a pause. He convinced me to drive to his shop, and we then went on a mountain hike to a serene lake where we had a picnic in a spot that felt untouched by anyone else. That evening, I drove home wrapped in the warmth of love. We became an official couple 2 weeks later. After a month, I started spending weekends at his. We had a small wedding ceremony on Labor Day last year. Throughout our time together, I've played a crucial role in the business. When I first started dating Ryan, the shop was a mess. I haven't mentioned it before, but Ryan's mom had passed away from cancer, just as Emily moved out. Ryan's dad fell apart after that, and the shop suffered as a result. At 25, Ryan and his brother inherited it. They had handled the operational work over the previous couple of years, but they were clueless about managing the business side. Honestly, I don't think the shop would have lasted another 6 months without my help. It had always operated on a cash basis. Customers would drop off their toys but wouldn't pick them up until they paid cash for the parts and services. The issue was that their dad had stopped filling out work orders properly. By the time he passed, he was billing customers from memory, which left a mess for the brothers to sort through. Our first big change was to ensure that every job was properly documented. They started recording the parts used and the time taken to fix a unit. We even added a small surcharge for oil, nuts, and polish that came with any job. That became their first step toward reviving the shop as a business. We also focused on establishing proper banking arrangements. An operating line of credit backed by their land and building gave us the time needed to implement meaningful changes. The bank required an audit, but we found a local firm willing to conduct it at a reasonable rate, thanks to my credentials as the business controller. I was so proud when we secured that deal. As many of you might guess, charging the real prices for their work instead of their dad's guesstimates raised concerns among customers. They had enjoyed a long period of sweet deals and were starting to blame the brothers for taking advantage of them. Unfortunately, customer perception is their reality. The final straw was changing our parts supplier. The family had relied on a wholesaler in the city for their parts. They would inspect a machine, determine the necessary parts, and then check with the wholesaler. While the parts weren't priced poorly, the shipping fees were crippling. They either paid to have parts sent via Purolator or UPS, or one of the brothers made the trip to the city themselves. Ryan was actually on one of those trips when we met. He ended up having to stay overnight to collect the parts because he was late getting to the warehouse. The shop had a 10% markup on parts, charging $110 for a part that cost them $100. This is standard in their industry since they profit mainly from service. However, their costs for getting parts were eating into that 10% markup and cutting into their service profit. Compounding the issue, their dad was forgetting parts in the billing. As I mentioned earlier, we're considered the best shop in the area. We didn't realize how significant our volume of parts orders was until we started communicating directly with manufacturers. The key to saving money lies in the volume and grouping of orders. I managed to compile a list of parts that we used every season, regardless of how the season unfolded, barring a disaster, of course. This allowed us to order in bulk, essentially filling a shipping container, and drastically reduce shipping costs. Afterward, we contracted directly with the manufacturer for these orders. Ultimately, with volume discounts, we saved about 35% on parts costs. We passed along 20% of those savings to our customers, which alleviated their concerns about the brothers possibly price gouging. Since that change, the shop hasn't had a bad month. It was a lot of hard work. Kara even helped during the process, leveraging some of her import. We clicked, and that's when our friendship/client relationship began. I remember Ryan had to spend 2 weeks in Mexico to finalize the deals. I share all this because I'm contemplating divorce. I've been useless all morning, writing this during my lunch break. No, I'm not solely fixated on money. I'm a competent professional and will be fine no matter what happens. Yet I'm hurt, and thoughts of making him pay are creeping in. I believe everything I've done for the shop proves I've played a major role in its success. Even if I'm not an owner, I feel I deserve some respect for my contributions. The reason I'm feeling this way is because I've caught on to how the two lovebirds have been conducting their affair. It makes me sick to think about it, to be honest. They seem to have organized their monthly rendezvous right under my nose. I had suggested that we do these monthly mountain adventures with our dirt bikes or snowmobiles, exploring remote locations. Initially, it was Ryan's idea to foster connections with customers and encourage them to use the vehicles we repaired. I thought it was a brilliant plan. What I didn't mention was that Ryan and Emily always picked the destination, often choosing routes that were out of reach for us non-experts. They would race ahead, leaving me behind in a sort of no man's land between them and the newcomers. The start of the rides was always slow, as they ensured everyone was familiar with safety and vehicle care. Inevitably, they'd grow bored and speed off to the destination, leaving me to meander along with the less experienced riders and make sure they were having a good time. Typically, they would be away for an hour or two, but always return to help the group set up lunch. Then, decisions were made about whether to venture further or start the descent. They were consistently present and supportive during the descent, since that part is the— Thinking back to this past Saturday, it all makes sense. The little gorge that caught Emily wasn't so perilous that falling in would lead to major injuries. It was merely a delay, and getting stuck was possible without help. I was riding behind her, perplexed as to why she took such a risky line so close to it. There were much safer routes available. Ryan was over a ridge, so he didn't witness what transpired. Emily attempted to power through, but she didn't make it. The back end of her bike fell and dragged her in. Now it's clear she intended for me to be the one to fall while she zipped over the ridge. That way, she could enjoy herself with Ryan, and they would eventually rescue me on their return. The guilt response she had was triggered when her plan fell through, and I ended up helping her out. This morning, I tried calling her a few times and even sent a text, "Please respond to me." Eventually, he works as an event coordinator at the resort, so he usually picks up his phone. He informed me that Emily had a vacation planned for this week and that he couldn't reach her either.
She'll be back this Sunday.
My only thought, yeah, I admit it, I suspect she's getting an abortion right now. I'm heading home after work today to confront my cowardly husband. I'll update everyone once that happens. Here's the rewritten story, with the requested name changes. I've seen copies of the very first tests for professional accountants. They were always some form of the same thing, columns and rows of numbers that needed to be added and cross-added. If the total of the row additions matched the total of the column additions, then you were in balance and passed the test, assuming your math was right, of course. Back then, the budding professionals were given a couple of hours to get the task done. No calculators, of course. Today, that same test would take less than 30 seconds to complete. Just take a picture of the test, import it into a spreadsheet, and voila. It always amazes me when people hear about my profession and their first comment is, "You must be good at math." That isn't anywhere near what an accountant does anymore. I've been in public practice for 5 years now, and what I do has nothing to do with math. In today's world, accounting is about financial information, compliance, communication, and negotiation. I have training in all of these elements. It was my negotiation skills that I needed the most in confronting Ryan. I needed him to give me the truth, and I knew that he would resist that. I went into the discussion with a plan and a couple of backup plans, but when all was said and done, I failed. Here's how it all went down. I left work early. It was a wasted day anyway. I had 1 billable hour on my timesheet when it's usually 7 to 10. I'm sure it will be noticed. I should have just taken a sick day, but it is what it is. I left at 4:30, with plans to be home around 5:30. I told Ryan that I would be home around my usual time of 7. I wanted time to pack some things just in case he fessed up, but being honest, a sad part of me just wanted to walk into the house and catch the two of them in the act. Ridiculous, I know, given that we share locations, but maybe he just leaves his phone at the shop when he's banging Emily in my bed. I used the hour commute to focus on ways to stay positive in our conversation. It's one of the key ways to keep your opponent engaged. Negative energy just spirals, and then no one wins. My last couple of days proved that. I know this is always easier when you have no skin in the game, but today all of my skin was in this game, and it hurt like hell. I focused myself and practiced my questions in my mind. I needed him to open up and be honest with me. There was no one in the house when I got there. Thankfully, I brought a couple of large suitcases from my mom's house, and I had a couple more there. I filled them all with my clothes and keepsakes. I considered taking a couple of pictures off the wall, but opted to leave them, so it didn't look so obvious when he came in. I loaded it all into my car trunk and then waited for him. I did take a bit of time to make sure I didn't look or smell like the walking zombie that I felt inside. I met him at the door at 7:15 with a big hug and meaningful kiss. I knew it might be our last, so I savored the moment. partially because I wanted to get him in the right mood and partially because I needed some positive energy for our discussion. I counted on him bringing some food and drink home with him, and he didn't disappoint me. We sat at the kitchen table, and he started the conversation by asking about my mom. I texted him earlier in the day that I was feeling fine, so the question made complete sense to me. I told him that she was doing well, looking healthy, and I thanked him for understanding my last-second visit. He said that he understood but missed me yesterday and last night. I thanked him for that and knew it was time to start our real conversation. I started with a simple lead-in question. Have you talked to Emily since Saturday night? His response was simple, quick, and lacked any noticeable body language cues. He said, "No, why would I?" It wasn't a response I wanted though, because responding with a question forces my hand. A simple "no" would have left me to continue controlling the conversation, but now I had to respond. I was ready for this though, and followed up with, "Didn't you see how drunk she was?" I was intently focused on his body language at that moment. His brow furrowed, but his eyes shifted to the left, with no pupil dilation change. His demeanor then changed, and he said while laughing, "Yeah, I wonder if she's still hungover."